Hello everyone, my name is Myra Juarez and I will be doing my presentation on the Bracero program. What was the Bracero program? It was a program established by the executive order called the Mexican Farm Labor Program. It initiated after the draft during World War II due to a shortage of people to work the farms. They created it in 1942 with the largest concentration of workers in California, Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico. The program was created as an agreement by the United States and Mexico that allowed Mexican men to work legally in the U.S. on a short-term contract. Events leading up to the creation of the Bracero program. It happened during World War II. There was a labor shortage precisely in agriculture, so they found that a lot of the crops were going bad because they didn't have anybody to work the fields or the farms. But prior to this, in the 1930s, there were millions of Mexican American citizens who were unjustly targeted and deported back to Mexico. So during the Bracero program, a lot of these people were given the opportunity to come back to their homeland and pretty much work as braceros when they should have been here from the beginning, but yet they were treated as someone foreign or an immigrant, and they were giving these cards saying that they were braceros and they were allowed to work here in the US temporarily. The bracero working routines were very difficult, so even though they were hired to work, they endured many hardships while they were working. They did travel by train to their work sites, but they left their families behind for months at a time. Once they arrived to their work sites, they were bathed in kerosene and then covered in powder known as DDT to ensure that they were not bringing in any infections or that they weren't carrying any sort of diseases with them. Once they arrived at their work site and they started to work, they were working for several hours under the hot sun, which did lead to many back issues for several of them because they were stooped over picking crops their entire time, and then wages were not paid fairly. The significance and impact during this event. So during the Bracero program, it did give an opportunity for many to work in the US legally, so that was definitely a positive. But at the same time, many undocumented workers were crossing over and working for a lower pay rate and yet had more freedom than the braceros. So ultimately, there were a lot of immigrants that were coming in and working for lower wages, which did impact the braceros and also the Mexican American communities. So it did cause a lot of problems between them because they were all trying to work the same area, but yet some were getting paid at a lower rate, which were basically the people that were coming in as immigrants, and that didn't allow for the people that were working either as braceros or the ones that were Mexican Americans to be paid fairly. Eventually, this did lead to the Wetback Act of 1953, which was signed by President Dwight Eisenhower. What he attempted to do with this was pretty much deport all illegal immigrants that were in the U.S. at the time to try to prevent riots and unions from forming, any labor unions that were forming at the time. Once these individuals were deported, I thought it was very weird and kind of funny in a sense. They were given the opportunity to return as braceros because they thought this was fair because they were doing it legally or properly instead of just coming to the US undocumented. The Bracero program did come to an end on December 31st, 1964, due to the development of machinery, which meant that these machines can pretty much replace manual labor, so there was no longer a need or a demand for braceros to be in the US. A lot of them returned home not only with physical but mental trauma, which they endured during their time of employment. One of the concepts that I was able to identify during this project was institutional oppression. The definition is the systematic mistreatment and marginalization of specific groups built into the law, policies, and practices of societal institutions. Braceros pretty much lived through institutional oppression as they were seen as dirty and nowhere similar to the white race. They received different treatment that resulted in the use of harsh chemicals to disinfect or clean, and some were citizens that had been deported due to the way they looked. Another concept was exploitation, which is the act of using resources, situations, or people unfairly to gain a selfish advantage, often resulting in harm or injustice to others. The braceros were definitely exploited as they were not given proper wages or treated properly. They were forced to work in harsh conditions, and they were subjected to chemical exposure. In Historian as a curandera, we are told or we read that we see history and that it can be explained in different aspects that can help heal. So for this specific scenario, I think it's telling the stories as they were experienced by the people who lived it in order to keep their memories alive. I think a lot of the times in textbooks we only learn what the American culture kind of goes through and what they see, but it doesn't really reflect what the other culture goes through as well. So, for instance, for the braceros, it's explaining their unfair treatment during this time and how they managed to make it through these hardships. The impact I want to go over is on students. So, as we have learned in most of the historical events, only the parts that are relevant to American history are what is taught. So, a lot of the times we only see the American version of the events that happened, but not everything else that happened in between. And I think this impacts learning by not presenting all of the evidence and making us be one-sided. This issue is an ongoing struggle, and I think we see it in a lot of the events that are happening today. One being the problem with ICE and how there's a lot of deportation, especially when it comes to children, and it's only certain groups that are being targeted, even though they're saying that that's not the case. We know it is because it just seems to be something that continues to happen. It's different races, but it's still the same thing that happens continuously, where certain people are being targeted or looked at as different, and it's repeating through history. The discussion question is the following. Do you think the chemical use during the inspection process was justifiable, humane, or necessary? In my opinion, I don't think it was any of those. It was not justifiable, it was not humane, and it was not necessary. Just because we came from a different country, we were looked at as being dirty, and people had to go through very difficult exams, not just a physical exam, but they had to go through rectal exam checks, they had to go through chemical sprays, they had to go through kerosene baths, which is crazy to me to even think that that was considered a form of cleanse back in the 1940s, that it was something legal to do. So no, I don't think, in my opinion, that any of that was necessary, humane, or justifiable. That will conclude the end of my presentation, and I thank you all for listening. Thank you.